Poor girl delivers lunchboxes to help her mother. The millionaire eats in silence and cries. What he does next moves the city. In the middle of the noisy cafeteria of a Dallas construction site, everyone stopped when they saw Claire enter. Covered in dust, carrying a makeshift cooler bag made of duct tape, she met the rude glances and muffled laughter of the workers. Her faded uniform and torn socks drew cruel jokes, but it was when she approached the last table that the humiliation reached its peak. Sitting alone, wearing a suit and an imported watch, businessman Alec Monroe, the tycoon behind the construction project, looked up, scrutinized the girl as if evaluating a defective object, and blurted out in front of everyone, "Is that your mother's gourmet lunchbox? You should pay us to eat that." The laughter was instantaneous. Claire, teary-eyed, set the container on the table with trembling hands, without saying a word. Alec, indifferent, took a spoonful and made a theatrical face, eliciting more laughter. But no one noticed that he didn't spit it out. He didn't even keep eating, until he scraped the bottom of the bowl in silence. And in the end, he just lowered his head and cried. The next morning, an unusual commotion caught the attention of the neighborhood in the Oak Cliff ghetto. Trucks, security guards, journalists. Claire, still drowsy, opened the door and froze. Alec Monroe himself was standing there, holding an envelope and staring at her with red-rimmed eyes. What he said brought her mother to her knees. Claire, confused, listened as he revealed something no one expected. 17 years ago, my daughter was kidnapped at birth. There's a mark under her left rib cage. And this lunchbox, this recipe was my wife's. No one else in the world would know how to make it. The silence that fell over the neighborhood seemed eternal. Alec wasn't there to return the insult. He was there because he had discovered something that would change his life. And Claire's forever. What he did next moved the entire town. Before continuing, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you can continue receiving our real stories. Thank you very much. In the heart of a scorching Texas summer, Dallas's busiest construction site pulsed like a living organism. Shouts of command, the metallic sound of cranes, red dust hanging in the air. It was there that Alec Monroe, a construction magnate known as much for his empire as for his contempt disguised as pragmatism, personally supervised his newest project, a luxury complex that promised to redefine the city skyline. But despite the project's brilliance, his gaze was cold, his presence shrouded in distance. To the employees, he was a ghost in a tie, ever present, yet unreachable. Claire, on the other hand, was all too visible. Every day, at noon sharp, she appeared with her lunchboxes, homemade food, painstakingly prepared by her ailing mother, sold to the workers to ensure basic necessities. The simply dressed girl with a steady gaze walked between trucks with light steps, as if each meal carried not only rice, beans, and meat, but also dignity, honor, and despair. The contrast between her and Alec was almost theatrical. He, surrounded by luxury and silence, she clad in dust and courage. For weeks, their paths crossed without a word being exchanged, until the day Alec, out of whim or boredom, decided to try one of the lunchboxes. The gesture itself wouldn't have been remarkable, if not for the way the world stopped when he called her. Claire hesitated before approaching. He pointed to the bench next to him with an inquisitive look, and she, surprised, obeyed. What began as a random gesture would become the beginning of a story no one there could have foreseen. Because behind the taste he pretended to despise, there was a hidden memory. A taste he hadn't experienced in almost 2 decades, and in that simple mixture of rice, pepper, and garlic, something awakened. Something much stronger than any concrete or steel project. In the heart of a sweltering Texas summer, where the sun seemed to melt even thoughts, Dallas's most ambitious construction site hummed like a living factory of dust, iron, and concrete. It was Monroe Holdings's largest project, a luxury apartment complex that promised to transform the city's landscape. And Alec Monroe, the billionaire behind it all, insisted on being present, albeit at a distance. With his tailored suits and his sunglasses always on his face, Alec rarely spoke to anyone. His presence was like the shadow of a building that hadn't yet existed, imposing yet untouchable. He observed everything from a high vantage point, in a glass room mounted atop a dedicated air-conditioned container, while dozens of workers sweated below like scurrying ants. And amidst that scene of machinery, concrete and haste, there was one figure that stood out from all the rest. Claire. She wore neither a hard hat nor reinforced boots. Her makeshift uniform was an old apron over an oil-stained t-shirt, and her torn sneakers seemed to fall apart with every step. But she walked quickly and with a clear destination, carrying in her hands a large cooler bag patched with duct tape and hope. Claire arrived every day at noon, exactly the same time, to sell lunchboxes made by her mother. The food was simple, but there was something special about the way she handled each delivery. While the workers laughed, mocked, or simply ignored her, Claire stood firm. To many, she was just another poor girl trying to survive. But to her mother, she was their only source of income. And for her, it was a point of honor not to return home with full bags. Her family's hunger was too real for that. Alec, from the top of his glass tower, watched everything. His eyes always returned to the same frail figure crossing the construction site, balancing pots and pans with dignity. No one knew what he was thinking. He never bought, never approached. Until one muggy Wednesday, everything changed. Alec came down, without warning, without fanfare. The workers stopped what they were doing as they watched him walk among the scaffolding, his leather shoes treading the earth as if floating. Claire, standing under the makeshift awning, noticed him approach. The silence was immediate. And then, with the same coolness with which he negotiated millions, Alec pointed to one of the lunchboxes and said simply, "This one." She hesitated. Her hands trembled. But she handed it over. The world seemed to hold its breath as he walked away with the lunchbox in his hands. He returned to his office, closed the door, and for the first time, didn't watch. He ate, in silence, and no one understood why. In the heart of a sweltering Texas summer, where the heat seemed to boil the asphalt and make the air vibrate like a mirage, Dallas's most ambitious construction site took shape day after day, the sound of jackhammers, spinning. Cranes' hammers against steel, and men shouting orders formed the soundtrack of that inhospitable place. It was there that Alec Monroe, one of the richest and most feared businessmen in the American South, expanded his concrete empire. The gigantic structures of the unfinished skyscrapers rose like the skeletons of titans, and among them dozens of workers moved like scurrying ants. Alec observed everything from above, from inside a glass room built on a dedicated container with air, conditioning, a minibar, and armored walls. Always wearing a dark suit, mirrored glasses, and a bored expression, he seemed more like an entity than a human being. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask names. He was known for being ruthless in business and for treating people like numbers. But there was one exception that broke the logic of that rigid world. Claire. She wasn't an employee. She didn't have a badge. But everyone knew who the thin girl was, with shabby clothes and a quick step, who showed up regularly at noon carrying a makeshift cooler bag. Claire delivered homemade lunches that her mother prepared at home, a damp studio apartment in the suburbs of Oak Cliff, where the gas was controlled by a knob and the light blinked when the microwave turned on. The food was simple but prepared with care and seasonings reminiscent of hugs, fluffy rice, rich beans, meat with the aroma of sautéed butter. The workers fought over the lunches. Claire didn't charge much. She wanted to sell everything to buy medicine for her mother, who could no longer get out of bed. Her father, he had disappeared when she was 8. Her childhood was cut short the same day she discovered that the only way to survive was to work. Claire walked amid the noise of construction with silent dignity, her hair tied back in a makeshift bun, her eyes fixed on the next customer. She didn't look at Alec. She knew she wasn't part of that world. Until the day he came down, without warning, without security, without his usual air of superiority, and in front of everyone he pointed to one of the lunchboxes and said dryly, "That one." Silence spread like wildfire. Claire froze. He had never spoken to her. He handed her the container with trembling hands. Alec stared at her for a second, emotionless, then turned and walked back to his glass tower. But that day, unlike the others, he didn't just stare. He sat down. He opened the container and ate, in silence, alone, until he scraped the bottom. She wasn't born lucky. Claire came into the world in a community hospital, amid the muffled cries of a weary mother and the absence of a father who would never return. Her childhood was marked by winters without enough blankets, summers where food was divided 4 ways to last 2 days, and nights where the silence of the house was broken only by the suppressed sobs of a sick woman trying to hide her daughter's pain. Living in the suburbs of Oak Cliff wasn't just about facing poverty. It was about learning to survive on the bare minimum without letting it rob her of her dignity. From a young age, Claire learned to understand what no one was saying. She could read in her mother's eyes the fear of not being able to afford the antibiotics. She knew the exact moment when her neighbor started drinking too much and she needed to lock the door. She learned to cook rice at 9, to sell candy at traffic lights at 11, and to hand out flyers in both rain and shine at 13. Time didn't give her a childhood. It only gave her the knowledge that no one would come to save them. Her mother, Helena, was a strong woman as far as her body could bear. She worked 3 shifts until a kidney failure forced her to bed, and she never left. Claire, at just 17, found herself taking care of the house, the finances, her mother, everything. She dropped out of school not for lack of will, but because work was urgent and hunger was immediate. The lunchboxes were Helena's own idea. "You cook better than me," she would say with pride and sadness in her eyes. The kitchen became the battlefield of survival. Claire would get up at 4 in the morning every day, prepare 60 portions, handwrite labels, and organize everything in the old thermal bag sewn with different colored thread. Then she would cross the city by bus, walking the rest of the way. Almost always, she arrived breathless, sweaty, with her pants frayed at the knees and bruised feet. But even so, she smiled. She knew every worker's name, what each one liked and disliked. She knew who had children, who sent photos of their lunchboxes to their wife, who secretly ordered on credit, and who sometimes paid $1 more. She didn't judge, she understood. And she did all this with her head held high, never allowing herself to break. But inside, Claire carried the exhaustion of someone who lives 20 years in just 5. At night, sitting beside her mother's bed, she held her hand and pretended everything would get better. She repeated made-up stories saying she'd gotten more than she'd actually sold, and even if she cried alone in the bathroom later, she returned every day with the same silent strength. She never waited for miracles. She never had time to dream. All she wanted was to pay for her mother's treatment and, who knows, maybe one day be able to go back to school. Her biggest dream was too small for the world to see. Just a clean, calm, and safe place where her mother could sleep without pain. And it was with this purpose that Claire crossed paths with Alec Monroe, unaware that her life was about to be pulled from the darkness, not out of pity, but because of a truth buried in the past, silently waiting for the inevitable reunion. The 3rd day of the week began like all the others, stuffy, noisy, and impatient. Claire had already made the entire journey to the construction site, balancing the weight of her lunchboxes with the precision of someone who's been repeating the same ritual for months. This morning, however, something was different. The laughter wasn't accompanied by smiles. The atmosphere was more tense. The workers whispered in groups and looked at her as if they knew something she didn't. Claire, as usual, ignored them. She continued on. She arranged the containers on the makeshift table near the entrance and began calling out the names of those who had ordered lunch. Each delivery was a quick, precise moment, like a timed dance, and everything was flowing smoothly until the voice of Liam, one of the site's oldest foremen, interrupted the movement with a mocking shout. "Gentlemen, be quiet. Our VIP client will taste poverty today." There was a wave of laughter and whistles. Claire froze. Everyone looked in the same direction. Alec Monroe was emerging from his glass tower. For the first time since the project began, he was walking among the employees during lunch. Claire didn't understand what was happening. Alec was coming straight toward her, his steps measured, his eyes hidden behind his mirrored glasses. As he approached, He stopped in front of the table, stared at the jars, pointed to one, and said in a cold voice, "This one." Unsure if it was a joke or a challenge, Claire took the indicated jar. It was hot, filled with rice, grilled chicken, and garlic sauce. She held it out carefully, trying to contain the trembling in her hands. Alec took it dismissively and in front of everyone lifted the lid. The crowd thickened around them. Liam shouted again, "Be careful, Mr. Munro, it might trigger childhood memories or poisoning." Laughter erupted. Alec sniffed the food with an expression of exaggerated disgust. Claire felt her cheeks burn. She knew they were laughing at her. She tried to pull away, but Alec wouldn't let her go. "Wait." Everyone fell silent. "Did you make this?" he asked, still holding the jar. Claire nodded slightly. Alec grabbed a plastic fork from the table and speared a piece of chicken. "Poverty served hot," he said sarcastically before putting the food in his mouth. There was general laughter. But the next moment, while everyone waited for another joke, Alec became serious. He chewed slowly, swallowed. Silence. And then, as if nothing had happened, he turned his back and returned to his tower. Claire stood still, unsure if she'd been humiliated or ignored. But what she didn't know, and what no one there could tell, was that Alec had eaten it all. Every grain. Every morsel. And when he finished, he rested his head in his hands and remained motionless for nearly half an hour. But for the world, what remained was the image of the joke. The bet among the workers. "Will he be able to eat this?" they said. $10 and he'll spit it out. And in the end, even though no one saw, he ate, and he cried. The next morning, Claire was even more tired than usual. The previous night had been difficult. Her mother had a fever, and the fan had stopped working due to a power outage. She spent the night fanning her mother's face with an old notebook, trying to keep her cool until dawn. Even so, at 4:20 she was already up, chopping vegetables and sautéing rice, as she did every day. That lunchbox Alec had brought the day before meant nothing to her. Or at least, that's what she tried to convince herself. He was a billionaire. She was a girl with no last name. There was no reason for it to be more than an isolated moment. Still, as she walked through the construction site gates, she felt different looks. They weren't just mocking anymore. There was curiosity, expectation, and a strange tension in the air. Liam walked past her and said something out of the corner of his mouth, but Claire couldn't understand. Something had changed, but she followed the same ritual. She set the table, lined up the pots, called out the names. At one point, a shadow approached silently. Claire felt it before she saw it. When she looked up, Alec Munro was standing in front of her. No bodyguards, no tie, saying nothing. He pointed again to one of the lunchboxes. She handed it to him. He took it, and before turning away, said in a low voice, "It was the same." Claire didn't understand. He stared at her for a few seconds as if searching for something in her, something lost, something old. Then he walked away without looking back. That was the first time he spoke to her without sarcasm. In the following days, this happened again. Alec would discreetly go downstairs, grab a lunchbox, eat in silence and return. He didn't say anything else. But Claire noticed something. He wasn't the same man everyone feared. He seemed less rigid, more present, almost human. And when he ate, he closed his eyes, as if trying to remember a time that no longer existed. She began to observe too. Little by little, she began to notice small details. The way he held the fork with his left hand, but it was trembling. The way he looked at the rice, as if he recognized it. And one day, without knowing why, Claire asked, "Are you okay?" He took a moment to answer. Then he said, "You add fried garlic at the end, don't you?" Claire nodded. "My mother used to do the same." And left. Claire stood there, feeling something strange growing inside her. For the first time, she saw fragility in his eyes, an emptiness that not even money could hide. From that day on, their meetings became a silent routine. There was no conversation, but there was an exchange. He sought more than food, and she was beginning to notice it. The millionaire who once seemed made of stone now exuded memories that consumed him from within. And in the midst of it all, without knowing exactly why, Claire began to pack a special lunchbox just for him, with more care, with more seasoning, and with an anonymous note hidden under the napkin. 4 difficult days. I understand. She didn't know that this, such a simple gesture, was about to break down a decades-old wall built by pain, loss, and silence. Friday arrived with an overcast sky foreshadowing a storm. The construction site seemed more muggy than usual, and the atmosphere among the workers was strangely tense. Claire arrived as usual, with firm steps, but feeling the weight of the air and the loose words floating around her. "It's today," one worker whispered to another. "It's going to be ugly." She didn't understand. She simply arranged the lunchboxes on the table, adjusted the cutlery, and began calling out names. But instead of approaching as they did every day, the workers seemed hesitant. Some crossed their arms, others chuckled. And then Claire saw it. Alec Monroe was coming down from his glass office again, but this time, something was different. He wasn't alone. He was accompanied by 2 company directors, men in suits with clipboards in hand, and around him a growing circle of curious onlookers formed. Alec stopped in front of Claire's desk, looking around, as if about to announce something. She didn't know what to expect. "Today we're going to try something new," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This one," she pointed to the lunchbox, "is the most talked about food on this site. So we'll do a public quality test. Everyone's invited." Laughter erupted. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. One of the directors pulled out a cell phone camera and started recording. "Let's see if the girl with the lunchbox really has culinary talent, or if she's just another romantic farce of poverty." The laughter grew louder. A group began to shout, "Proof, proof, proof!" Claire tried to speak, but her voice failed. Alec picked up the lunchbox and theatrically opened the lid. "Smells interesting. Looks acceptable." He lifted a spoonful, looked around like a reality TV host and put it in his mouth. He chewed slowly. Then he swallowed, wiped his mouth with a napkin and said, "It's edible." The laughter was cruel, but he continued. "However, I found a hair." Claire choked on air. It could happen, of course, in the kitchens or on the floor. Someone shouted, "Yuck!" Another, "You'll get your money back." And cell phones began recording en masse. Alec pretended to look for more flaws. "There's no health inspection seal, no expiration date, no proper packaging." Claire tried to explain, but he interrupted her with a gesture. "We're in a professional environment. This construction site follows protocols, and amateurish lunchboxes compromise the quality of the work." Silence. He stared at Claire as if she were a nuisance. "Starting today, outside food is prohibited, for food safety reasons." That was a punch. The crowd was somewhere between surprised and confused. Claire still held one of the unsold jars. Her hands trembled. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't want to let fall. Alec turned away, emotionless, as if he'd simply followed protocol. But before getting into the waiting car, he stopped, looked over his shoulder and said, for all to hear, "Poverty is no excuse for improvisation." And he got in. Claire stood there, surrounded by silence, the jars on the table, the sweat dripping down, and the bitter taste of public humiliation. That afternoon, the rain fell heavily, and she left beneath it, carrying not only the unsold jar, but also a wound no one there saw, except him. Night fell heavily over Oak Cliff, and with it came the cruelest silence Claire had ever felt. Her mother slept, exhausted, after a bout of grief, and Claire sat on the porch, still wet from the rain, the untouched lunchboxes beside her. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't curse. She just stared into space, trying to understand why this had happened. She wasn't naive. She knew the world wasn't fair. But there was something about Alec Monroe that felt different. For days he had eaten in silence, received her hidden notes, looked at her with something that resembled longing, and now the same mouth that had tasted her food had spat his words before a crowd. That night was the first time Claire hadn't slept. She woke with her eyes open, her heart at war. As she packed the lunchboxes for the last time, she felt no hope. She knew she wouldn't sell, but she had to go. She had to look into his eyes. She arrived at the construction site not through the side entrance, but through the main one, the same one she'd used before. There was no cooler bag this time, just a single lunchbox, wrapped in a clean cloth and tied with a string. She crossed the central courtyard as if walking to say goodbye, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the muffled laughter. She stopped in front of the glass room. She knocked. No one answered. Then she went in. Alec was there, alone, standing, staring out the window, as if he'd been waiting for her. Claire said nothing. She placed the lunchbox on the table, pulled a small note from her pocket, and left it beside it. As she turned to leave, he spoke. "You have no idea what this food means to me." Claire paused, but didn't look back. "Then why did you expose me like that?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Why did you humiliate me?" Alec took a moment to answer. "Because I was afraid." She turned slowly. Afraid of what? He stared at her, and in that moment, Claire saw something in his eyes she never imagined she would see. Regret. Afraid to admit that that food was the same one my mother made when I was a child. The same recipe, the same taste, the same smell. Claire frowned. "And that scares you?" "It scares me because it means something impossible is before me." A tense silence fell. Claire took a deep breath. "I know who you are, Alec Monroe, but you don't know who I am." He frowned. She continued. "My mother worked as a cook in one of your houses. Years ago. She was fired after the boss's wife accused her of stealing a piece of jewelry. They never tasted it, but she lost everything. Her job, her house, her dignity." Alec felt like he'd been hit by an invisible punch. "Which house?" Claire stared at him. "White house, blue windows at the top of the hill. His wife was blonde. She had a grand piano." Alec's gaze shifted. He staggered back slightly. "My God." Claire just nodded. "I knew who you were from day one, but you had no idea who stood before you." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Claire turned once more, and before leaving, glanced over her shoulder. "It wasn't the food that messed with you. It was the memory. And I'm the mirror you tried to break in public, just so you wouldn't see what was inside you." She walked out, leaving Alec alone, faced with a closed lunchbox and a past that had just been awakened. In the solitude of his penthouse, Alec Monroe no longer recognized his own life. The expensive furniture, the polished marble, the imported wines, everything felt like a set for a play he no longer wanted to perform. The lights remained on, but the house was dark inside. For the first time, the silence was deafening. He avoided mirrors, he avoided photographs, he avoided any memory that would force him to face what he had become. He felt a nagging emptiness in his chest, an invisible wound that no amount of money could heal. He spent his days locked away, reviewing images of Claire, enlarging pixelated stills from videos, pausing frame by frame, searching for some trace of what could have been. He began walking the streets of Oak Cliff, dressed as an ordinary man. He wanted to understand her world. He sat in public squares. He talked to street vendors. He visited soup kitchens. He went to the church where Claire was said to occasionally leave anonymous donations. No one recognized him, and that was exactly what he needed. For the first time in years, Alec allowed himself to be nobody, and in that anonymity, something in him began to crumble, only to finally be reborn. He began cooking, at first just tentatively, then with more commitment. He watched YouTube videos, remembered what his mother used to make, and tested the ingredients in Claire's lunchbox. It took time, he made mistakes, he burned pots. But one day, he succeeded. And when he tasted it, he cried again. Not because of the taste, but because he understood that food carried history, pain, care. It was a kind of love he never knew how to cultivate, and that she had given him on a silver platter. He began writing letters, not to send, but to soothe his soul. Each night, a new page. Today I thought about how you arranged the lunchbox in layers, The rice on the bottom, then the beans and the chicken in the center, as if protecting the flavor. Today I understood that what scared me wasn't your silence. It was my noise. Today I thought that if you saw me now, maybe you'd still turn your face away, and I'd deserve it. Alec began donating. He sold cars. He terminated contracts with companies linked to exploitation. He founded a quiet organization supporting female heads of households. But he didn't put his name on anything. He didn't want glory, he wanted redemption. One day he walked into a neighborhood market and saw an elderly woman trying to choose between rice and soap. Without saying a word, he paid for the purchase and disappeared. He began to understand what Claire carried, the burden of the invisible, the pain that never makes headlines, the stories served in dented pots, but with soul. Alec Monroe, the tycoon, disappeared from the media. He ceased to exist as a character. In his place was a man marked by the absence of the daughter he might have had, and by the certainty that in the end, the mistakes we make against the little ones are the ones that define us most. The world went on without him, but now, for the first time, he learned to go on without masks. And all he wanted was a second chance, not to be accepted, but to be able to ask for forgiveness. With the humility of someone who has already tasted his own poison, and now understands the value of a simple hot dish. The reunion happened when Alec least expected it, or perhaps when he needed it most. It had been almost 4 months since he'd last heard her voice. He didn't know if Claire still lived in Dallas, if she'd moved, if she ignored him by choice, or if she simply preferred to erase him from her memory. Until that Saturday morning, walking through a community center on the outskirts of town, a movement caught his attention. A group of volunteers were setting up tables with groceries, clothes, and homemade food in simple packaging. It was a market supporting homeless families, and there, among plastic tents and makeshift tarps, Alec saw a silhouette his heart recognized even before his eyes confirmed it. Claire had her back to him, her hair tied up carelessly, helping an elderly woman sit on a folding chair. He wore ordinary clothes, but had the same determined posture. He froze. The world around him seemed to stop. His chest tightened. And then she turned. There. Eyes met. For an instant there was no sound, no wind, no footsteps. Just the two of them. The man who hurt her. The girl he lost. Claire recognized him immediately. But she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stared at him with a look that was hard to describe. No anger, but no relief either. It was as if she were seeing a past that had finally ended. Alec, for his part, tried to approach. His feet wavered. His hands trembled. When he was a few feet away, he took off his cap and spoke in a voice lower than he would have liked. "Are you okay?" Claire nodded. "I am." Silence. He continued. I've been trying to find a way to thank you. Or at least, apologize. Looking you in the eye. Claire took a deep breath. "You've looked me in the eye, Alec, but only when it was too late." He lowered his head. "I deserve this." She said nothing. He simply turned his gaze to a child asking for juice and knelt to help. Alec waited. When she stood up again, he held out a bag. "I made this. It's rice, garlic chicken, and a note, like yours." Claire took it, her hands still dirty from work. He opened the lid, smelled it, and something in his face softened. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't contempt either. It was recognition, memory, and maybe compassion. "Did you make this alone?" she asked. "Alone. It's too salty," she said, and turned away. But before he'd taken 3 steps, he stopped, looked over his shoulder and added, "But it's a start." Alec smiled, his eyes moist. This answer was more than he'd expected. She had come back to life before him, and that was enough. Claire hadn't hugged him, she hadn't invited him, she hadn't promised anything, but he hadn't kicked him out either. And that gesture, staying even for a moment, was the truest reunion Alec could have received. A reunion without tears, without a soap opera-like reconciliation. Just 2 souls who knew who they were, and also knew the price of silence, of pain, and of what one day could be rebuilt with time, truth, and hot food. Late afternoon brought a golden light to the community center, as if the sky wanted to soften the weight of that silent conversation. Claire continued working among the stalls, organizing donations, distributing food, and caring for the forgotten as she always had, with calm determination, without fanfare. Alec remained nearby, respecting the space, helping quietly like any other volunteer. For the first time, he wasn't there as a businessman, but as a man who had made a mistake. At the end of the setup, when the flow of people had slowed, Claire walked over to him. She was sweaty, her hair loose from the day's exertion, and a dish towel slung over her shoulder. Alec's heart was racing as if he were 15. She stopped a few feet away from him, observing his tired face, his red eyes, his simple shirt with its dirt-stained hem. And then she spoke. "You want to know if I forgive you?" He didn't answer. She continued. "But forgiveness isn't a key that unlocks a door and erases what happened. It's a window, and sometimes it only opens when the wind blows in." Alec swallowed. Claire continued. "What you took from me wasn't lunch boxes. It was the trust I had in what I loved most. Cooking was my way of caring, and you turned it into a joke in front of everyone." He lowered his gaze. "I know, and if I could go back, I'd do everything differently. But I can't. I can only listen to you now, and if it's all I have left, I'll be silent." Claire took a deep breath, and for a moment the weight of the words seemed to fall on them both like a light rain. "The truth is, I don't want to carry anger anymore. It's heavy, and I carry other things." Alec nodded, breathless. "So, yes, I forgive you," she said. "But not because you deserve it. It's because I deserve to move on in peace." He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the world slow down. When he opened them, Claire held something out to him. A lunchbox, warm, smelly, with his name handwritten on it. "It's free," she said, "but if you want to pay, come help next week." Alec smiled. This wasn't a fresh start. It was a chance. And to him, that was worth more than any asset. Claire turned and walked away, bidding farewell to volunteers, exchanging smiles. He watched her with the reverence of someone finally understanding what she had lost, and what, with humility, she might one day be able to rebuild. She had made up her mind. She forgave, but she hadn't forgotten. She opened the window but kept the door closed. And what Alec felt wasn't rejection. It was justice, poetic, silent, and whole. The following Sunday, even before the sun touched the humble rooftops of Oak Cliff, the aroma of garlic browning in butter was already floating through the alleys. The first light of day filtered through the frosted glass windows of the community center, where the pots clinked like bells. Alec Monroe, wearing a wrinkled apron and his hands marked by recent kitchen cuts, stirred the rice attentively. Beside him, Claire organized plastic containers with the same precision as always, but with a slight smile on her lips, a discreet smile, like someone observing a tree that, even crooked, insists on blooming. Outside, a line was forming. Simple, hungry, silent people. And for the first time among the volunteers, there were no distinctions. Claire was no longer the humiliated girl. Alec was no longer the man of steel. They were just two human beings serving lunches. When the clock struck noon, the doors opened. A child was the first to enter. She looked suspiciously at Alec, who bent down, smiled, and handed her a pot of rice, beans, and grilled chicken with fried garlic. The girl sniffed, smiled broadly, and ran off. Claire watched the scene but said nothing. He simply removed the cloth from his shoulder and began serving. Inside, discreetly taped to the kitchen wall, a small sheet of paper was taped. Handwritten, it read, "May the food be hot, may the heart be light, and may pride know when to get out of the way." That day no one took pictures, no one applauded, there were no headlines. But for those who were there, something changed. On the sidewalk in front, forgotten on a wooden bench, a single closed lunchbox awaited someone. No name, no recipient, just a note taped to the lid. "When you are hungry for forgiveness, help yourself freely. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched your heart in some way. So tell me in the comments Would you have forgiven in Claire's place? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please like this post. It really helps this channel reach more people with messages like this. Subscribe too, because every week we'll have real, moving stories with endings that touch your soul. And don't leave yet. The next video is already playing on your screen right now. Click and continue with us. The next story might move you even more.